In this video, I'm going to teach you guys probably one of my favorite principles in business. Now, you've heard different iterations of it where they say simple scales and fancy fails, but when I really start to sit down and think about it, it's one of those things that, like, the more complex the system, there's a great book, it's called The Theory of the Constraint. And when I started to read the book, I started to realize that a lot of times that in your business, and especially as you get up to certain levels, you're gonna start to realize those constraints start to get louder. There's a principle out there called the law of entropy. Now, just understand what the law, we don't have to go into it too much on this video, but just know that an object at rest will move more and more towards disorder. So what do I mean by that? So if we only have 10 patients, we already know that there's about 10% of entropy baked into those sessions, meaning that there's gonna probably be like one 911 fire to put out. Now, as you get to like 100 visits per week, now all of a sudden that law of entropy starts to enhance a little bit. It's still 10%, but now instead of one, now you have to deal with 10 fires that you have to put out on a weekly basis. And then as you guys start to grow and do 200, 300 or even 400 visits a week, like we have some practice owners right now doing over 1,000 visits a week inside the program. Now, because they're doing over 1,000 visits a week, that law of entropy has now grown to the point where they have almost 100 911s that they need to put out. Now, the reason why I mentioned that is because we're talking about simple and we're talking about fancy. Those issues would be significantly more or almost exponentially higher if they were running more of a fancy system. And by fancy, I mean like we just want to keep it simple. Everything's about simplicity because simple scales, fancy fails. Now, I think a lot of times, like most practice owners will use words with, I don't want to become a mill, or I don't want to become an assembly line. And I think that that's where a lot of owners start to realize or start to get tripped up a little bit. Like, yeah, we're not trying to double or triple book people or have 100 patients here at one time, but you definitely need to have systems where a patient can come in as a lead, they're able to go ahead and schedule their initial evaluation, they're able to show for their initial evaluation, they're able to go see the provider and then close into a plan of care, and then during that plan of care, they're able to go from visit number 2 to progress summary, and then from progress summary to graduation. And then after graduation, how are we going to reach out to that patient to either get a word of mouth referral, past patient reactivation, or whatever else you're trying to do to nurture that lead. That is called systemization, that is called optimization, and that is called keeping it simple, right? So that is an assembly line, right? And I'm cool with that. I want an assembly line business because I know that every 10 patients we bring in, we're going to be able to generate 10 patients out on the back end, and they're going to get results. You don't want to generate 10 patients in and only 2 people get results. And the reason why I mention that is because that's what was happening to us. We were generating all of these evaluations, but we started to pull the numbers and we took, hey, how many people actually graduated? By how many people actually came in? And our output was significantly lower than our throughput or our input, right? So we had patients coming in, but we didn't have a ton of patients that were successfully graduating. A lot of those patients, what they were doing is self-discharging. And the reasons why is because we had 3 locations and we had a laser at one location, we were doing dry needling at another location, we were doing blood flow restriction at one, but not the other 2. It was just kind of chaos, right? It was one of those things that we had 3 different clinics, different hours of operation, different this, different that, and it was just very, very fancy, but at the same time, when it came to scaling, there was a lot of chaos. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to compress that law of entropy, keep it as small as possible, and we just need to understand that we gotta keep it simple. So what are some ways to keep it simple and not lose our focus? Because ultimately what we're really talking about here is when those shiny objects come up, how do we focus on being like, hey, is this something that's gonna move us closer to our goals or further away? So the key here is that you always wanna do at the beginning of every single year, you want to set your vision for the company. So your vision is like, where are we trying to get to? Where are we trying to get to? Is it going to be like 10 clinics or 5 clinics, or we're trying to serve this area, or we're trying to serve this patient demographic? Like, what is your vision? And then the next thing is you need to make sure you take a look at your mission, which is your vision is where are we trying to get to? Your mission is the why we're trying to get there. And then obviously your core values are like, how are we supposed to behave when we're on the boat? So I'm getting on the boat, I got my whole team with me. It's just like, how are we supposed to behave here? And that's what our core values are. And the reason why we do that is we have an annual planning meeting, and then that's where we're gonna set the long-term vision of the company. And then ultimately it's like, that's where we set our annual goals. So then when things come up or sales rep come in, they knock on your door and you're like,
tell them I'm not here. I don't want to answer.
Right? These sales rep come in and they're like, I want to sell you this thing because I think it'll help you. And then ultimately we need to start asking the question like, is this actually going to get us to achieve those goals, or is it going to take us further away. And one thing that I want you guys to start asking yourselves when these decisions come up is that in 5 years from now, is this going to even matter? So if I get an Alter G right now in my clinic, can I picture myself having an Alter G in all 10 of my clinics? And I think a lot of us are like, well, you know, I'm probably not going to have it in all 10. It's like, well, great. Why would we even have it in one clinic if we're not going to have it in 10 clinics? Or if you start to look at it like a big piece of equipment like that, or a Biodex or something like that, this isn't a knock at those equipments because some of it's very warranted in some of your practices. But you know, if you look at it like an Alter G or an above water treadmill or something like that, right? It's one of those things that, like, what if we just got 2 treatment tables in there and had 2 providers working off each table and being able to generate $200,000 to $250,000 a year at each table, right? I don't know if an Alter G or, you know, above ground treadmill or something will be able to generate that for you. So it's one of those things that, like, we want to keep it super simple, because as we're trying to productize this thing to make sure that we have really good input and really good output, we want to keep it simple, and we want to avoid what I like to call the devil, the devil in the food truck. So sometimes what happens is, like, if you're in the desert right now and you're starving, and then all of a sudden the devil shows up and he's
Like, I got this food for you right now.
but 100 feet away is a food truck with keys in it and it's stocked full of food. It's like, make sure that you guys understand that that disruption is going to show up, and you want to step over that to make sure you hit your goal. And that's the key here, guys, is that, like, as your guys are growing right now, we got to look at constraints, we remove them, and then the sooner you can remove a constraint, that's the quicker you're going to be able to grow. So if you guys like this content, go ahead and hit the follow button and subscribe. And then if you guys want to learn more about figuring out what constraints you have in your business, go ahead and click the description and schedule a call with our team, and we'll look forward to talking to you. Take care, and I'll see you guys on the next video.